I gotta be completely honest and say that bread was something I never really dabbled in until about last year. For some reason, I found it really intimidating and too time consuming because, let's face it, I'm an impatient son of a bitch. But obviously, as a professional baker, patience is one of the most important ingredients in your arsenal. So it was only a matter of time before I explored the world of bread. And I don't think there's a better way to start exploring bread recipes than with focaccia. If you've never made bread before, focaccia is probably one of the easiest breads you can make. It only requires about 5 ingredients, and pretty much the only thing about it is it does require a decent amount of time. I like to let my focaccia dough sit in the fridge for about 24 hours before I transfer it to my pan and poke the holes and get it ready for the oven. So this is a fantastic thing to do in advance if you're planning an event or something. This is a great thing to make because you can do it ahead of time and you can have the dough ready day of. Lord Jesus. So to get started, we're going to activate our yeast here. So I have about 2.5 cups of lukewarm water. You don't want it to be too hot because that can kill the yeast. And I have about 2¼ teaspoons of active dry yeast. This is not instant yeast, it is active dry. 2¼ teaspoons is about 1 packet if you're buying a packet versus the jar. I like the jar, keep it in the fridge, that way I always have some. And we want to feed the yeast a little bit of sugar to help it bloom even more. So I'm going to put about 1 tablespoon of honey in this lukewarm water that the yeast is in. And just going to use my fork to kind of combine this all together. Now what you're looking for here, if you have never used yeast, is it's going to start foaming up and you'll smell it. It'll smell fermented, it'll smell like bread, and that's the sign of really good active yeast. But that should take 5 to 10 minutes. And in this bowl here, I have about 5 cups of all-purpose flour. Pretty much the only 2 ingredients you're gonna need aside from that is flour and salt. I have a tablespoon of kosher salt. Sounds like a lot, but we want really nice seasoned bread. If you don't have kosher salt, use about 2 teaspoons of regular salt. And it's a good idea to have your flour pre-measured for this because you may or may not need all of it, or you might need even more. The thing about bread is that even though there are so many recipes, it kind of turns out different for everybody, which I will admit was one of the intimidating things for me about the world of bread making. But you know, once you get in your groove and kind of get the feel for how things are supposed to be, it's really fun. All right, so this is looking pretty good. It is nice and foamy. I can tell the yeast is definitely active in there. So we're going to move over to our nice big bowl here. You do need a large bowl for this. You don't need a mixer, that's the other great thing. You can do this by hand. So into my bowl, I'm going to pour this water and activated yeast mixture. Make sure I get the honey out of there too. The honey adds just a touch of sweetness to the bread itself. Now to this, I'm gonna start off with probably just a couple cups of, about 2.5 cups of my flour in the bowl here, and I'm gonna start stirring this. It's always a good idea to start with flour first, and once about half your flour is mixed in, then it's safe to go in with the salt. And now I'm gonna go in with the rest of my flour, and I'm just gonna keep mixing this until we get what we call a shaggy dough, which is on the moist side. You don't want a very dry dough for this. This is looking fantastic, and I'll show you here. So the dough's got some moisture to it, which is what we want. You don't want a super dry dough. You want a little moisture in there. It'll be a little bit sticky, but it's totally fine. All right, so here's the other important thing about focaccia. While it is sitting in the fridge, you need to make sure there is a solid amount of olive oil in this bowl. So I'm gonna put probably about 1/3 cup of olive oil in this bowl. Sounds like a lot, but it needs it. The thing about focaccia is that olive oil is like, it's partner in crime. You can't do one without the other. So I'm going to transfer this dough to the bowl with olive oil here. I'm just gonna give it a couple folds together to kind of collect it into a ball and get it really nicely coated in this olive oil. And don't worry, there should be a pool around it. This is exactly how you want it to look. So that's it for the dough. This is a great thing to make in advance because there's more inactive time than there is prep time. It only takes a few minutes to get this dough together, and all the magic happens in the fridge. So I find that my focaccia is best when I've given it a solid 24 hours in the fridge. That sounds crazy, but there's just so much magic that happens with the yeast and the flour and all that fermentation that goes on when you give it a solid amount of time in the fridge. If you're looking for a bare minimum, I wouldn't go less than 8 hours on this, honestly. So this is definitely one of those things to make the day before. It's the morning now, so tomorrow morning, we're gonna be moving on with this, and I'm so excited. It is a new day in the kitchen, honey. This focaccia dough has been in the fridge for about 24 hours now, and look at how much this rose. It is perfect. It is absolutely incredible. So the next step includes more waiting, just not as much. This is gonna have to come to room temperature now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of punch this down, and I have a 9 by 13 inch pan here that I'm going to put a generous amount of olive oil in. I'd say probably about another 1/3 of a cup, honestly. And I'm just gonna kind of shake it around to make sure it coats everything. This dough is gonna have to proof in this pan for probably a couple hours, and we don't want it to stick in that process. So all you do is you punch the air out of the dough that rose in the fridge. We're gonna turn it out into this pan here. Looks like a lot of olive oil, but that's what focaccia needs. So I'm just gonna gently spread this around into this pan here. We're gonna let this sit at room temperature. I'm gonna lightly cover it with plastic and keep it at room temperature anywhere from like 1.5 to 4 hours, basically, until it has really doubled in size. It's puffed up and you see a bunch of those bubbles, which is what focaccia is famous for. So we're gonna let this go for a little bit more time. Patience is key here, but it is worth it. So one of the many amazing things about focaccia is that you can really get creative with what you put on it. You can put basically anything you like on focaccia, which is what makes it so exciting and personal. I personally really enjoy sliced shallot, fresh minced garlic, fresh minced rosemary, and some cracked black pepper, and that to me is great and fantastic, and I top it with Parmesan cheese after it's baked. But like I said, you want to get creative, you can use peppers, onions, tomatoes. The sky's the limit. It's fantastic. So I actually gave my focaccia about 3 hours. You know it's good when you can jiggle it and you barely have to move the pan, and you see that jiggling motion like that, all that air, you see the bubbles coming up. It's fantastic. That means the texture of this is going to be incredible. We're gonna drizzle even more olive oil on here. Not terribly too much, because there is a fair amount in the pan already, but we're gonna drizzle some on top. I'm actually gonna put my toppings on first, and then it's gonna like press them into the dough. So I've got sliced shallot here. I kept these pretty rough because they'll bake nicely in the oven. They won't be too intense. And I like seeing the curls of the shallot. It really adds texture and a cool look to it. And then we have our minced garlic we're just going to scatter on top as well, along with our rosemary. Gonna make sure everything is evenly distributed. And then some cracked black pepper. And now comes the fun part. We're just going to create those amazing dimples in there. And it's so cool. You can feel all the gases that built up as this rose. She is gorgeous and ready for the oven. This is gonna go into a 450 Fahrenheit oven for about 30 to 35 minutes, or until beautifully golden brown. You guys, do you know what time it is? It's focaccia time. Get her out of here. Look at all the bubbles on the bottom. This is gorgeous, guys. Gonna get a nice view of this cross section. Look at all of the air bubbles. It's smooth. But you can get the full written recipe on my website. The link for that's in the description, along with the link to my cookbook and social media. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button, leave some comments, and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, this is Bake It with AJ. Oh my, I think I need a minute. This right here is this is a moment.